to our third cooking class on behalf of Beyond Hunger. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Maria Delis and I'm one of 2 dietitians at Beyond Hunger. These cooking videos have been a fun way for us to reach all of you and a nice way for you to get to know us a little better too. Tonight I have a special guest. This is my mom, Anastasia Kaftadzi.
Γεια σας, Χριστός Ανέστη, χρόνια πολλά για τη γιορτή της μητέρας.
I thought it would be a fun way, in honor of Mother's Day, to have my mom here in our kitchen join us for a cooking class. And today we are going to be making Spanakopita. And this is a recipe that many of you have tried at Greek restaurants, but it's a recipe that I've grown up with and something that my mom still continues to make very, very frequently. We're making 2 versions of Spanakopita tonight. We're making a version that would be easier for all of you to make at home, made with store-bought phyllo. And then my mom is also going to show you how to make a Spanakopita making homemade phyllo, which is definitely a treat in our household. Let me just tell you a little bit more about my mom. So my mom was born and raised in a mountain village in northern Greece called Vavdos. Vavdos is located in a very beautiful area of northern Greece called Chalkidiki. Chalkidiki right now is known in the tourism industry as having some of the best beaches in Greece. But when my mom was growing up, beaches were the last thing that they were doing. She came from an agricultural family. They were farmers and they planted and harvested wheat, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. It was a lot of hard work.
Yes.
So the wheat that they harvested was used to create a lot of different things, and 2 main things that they used their wheat for was to bake bread. My mom is the youngest of 5 children, and she has 4 older brothers. So they would make bread every week for 7 people, and they would use 70 pounds of flour. Every week this would happen. In addition to baking bread with the wheat that they harvested, they also made phyllo dough, homemade phyllo dough, and this phyllo dough was used to create the many pitas that northern Greece is famous for. Pita is a word that is called pie, and Spanakopita means spinach pies. So in northern Greece, they're very famous for making all their different kinds of pies with this beautiful phyllo that they would all make from scratch. In my mom's family, they made lots of different pies. We're very familiar with the Spanakopita and tiropita, which is cheese pie, but in her family, they would make a lot of other pies. In the spring, there would be wild greens in the pie. In the winter time, they would make a pork with bulgur pie. In the summertime, they would make turn zucchinis into a cinnamon-scented pie. And then again in the winter was a cinnamon-scented pie made with butternut squash. So the pies that were made in the summer were not made with phyllo dough, they were made with flour. But in the winter, in spring, and in the fall, they would make their pitas with their homemade phyllo. And it was always homemade phyllo, never store-bought because it just didn't exist back then. So what we're going to do today is we are going to make 2 versions of this Spanakopita. And we're going to start off by making the homemade phyllo dough, because the dough balls that we're going to create need to rest for about 30 minutes. So we're going to show you how to make the dough. We are going to create the little balls that need to rest, and then we'll move on to making the filling for both of the pies. And then after we make the filling, we will make the Spanakopita with the store-bought phyllo. And then we'll end with rolling out the dough, which is really a fun process. I'll take a stab at it as well. I don't know how good I'm going to be at it. But my mom's been doing this since she was 15 years old?
Yes, 15, 16 years old.
Yes, so she's been doing this for a really long time. So she's going to show you how to roll out the phyllo, and we are going to create this beautiful homemade Spanakopita made with her own homemade phyllo. So let's get started on the ingredients for the phyllo dough, the homemade phyllo dough. So we have here, we're going to use some olive oil, we're going to use some warm water, some salt, and then she uses, here in the United States of course, she uses the gold medal all-purpose unbleached flour. And then a little cornstarch that she'll use when she rolls out the dough, and we'll show you what that looks like. So we have here a bowl of flour that we've already pre-measured. And the amount of flour in here is about 14 ounces by weight and about 3 1/3 cup measured by a cup measure. So we have that in there. She made a well in the center, and she's going to add about a half teaspoon of salt. And then she's going to add a little bit of warm water, and she's going to know how much warm water is needed based on the feel of the dough. And she's also going to add a little bit of oil as well,
Yeah.
a little bit of olive oil.
Λίγο. Και μετά θα ρίξουμε μετά και απ' έξω. Ρίξε. 1 tablespoon. Okay, that's enough.
So about 1 or 2 tablespoons of oil. And she's mixing that around with her fingers. And because she's been doing this for so long, she knows what the feel of the dough should look like. And she's going to make this dough until she feels happy with the texture of it. Well, while she's doing that, I wanted to show you a little bit of how they used to sift the dough back when my mom was growing up. So she brought me some of her sifters that she's had from Greece for a really long time. These are sifters that were made by hand, and you see the different types of holes that are in here. This one is a large hole sifter. These are all handmade. This is a sifter that has a fine mesh in it for sifting. And this is another sifter that has a more open holed design. So each of these were used for different functions in a household in Greece. So the most important thing that you should know is when they would harvest their wheat, they would take it to the mill and it would be ground and it would be given to them in big bags, which then they would have to sift at home. So they would sift the flour. Okay, she's gonna go get a little bit more water. So they would have to sift the flour in order to bake the bread that they needed to bake. The remaining bran that remained in the sifter was given to the animals for food, so nothing was ever wasted. So they would use these fine mesh sifters to sift their flour, and that would be used for their homemade bread. But when it was time to make phyllo, they would use another sifter that was similar to this, but the mesh would be even finer. It would be very similar to a silk screen. It would be a silk type of sifting material that would be even finer because they needed a finer type of flour in order to make phyllo. They would also use this extra sifted flour for their pasta making as well. So in northern Greece, they make a certain kind of pasta, and that was also made homemade, and they would sift it with that finer sifter. So that's what these would look like. Now the sifters that had the bigger holes were used to make a different kind of pasta that would be pushed through the holes, and it would create kind of like a coarse pebble. That was something that was very, very common in Greece and still is consumed to this day and is still homemade in many households. So this was something that they would make using this kind of bigger holed sifter. So these are really great memories that my mom has of her time living in Greece and growing up in Greece. And do you use any of these? You still use this one.
Use for όταν κάνουμε τα τραχανά.
Right. So she still uses this one to make her homemade.
Almost every year.
Every year. So
Yeah,
you make.
Yeah.
So she makes this homemade pasta every year. The one that is a coarse pebble that is pushed through. And this gets dried, and she's able to use it for the whole year. So the interesting thing, it took us a long time today to try to write down these recipes and explain them to all of you, because as you know, if any of you have grandmas or great aunts that passed down recipes through the generations, not many of them were written down. A lot of them were orally passed down. So it was quite a challenge for me to get this recipe down and understand all the measurements in order to make it clear for all of you. So she emptied out the dough onto another cutting board, and she's going to.
Θα με ρίξει λίγο αλεύρι εδώ κάτω.
So she wants a little bit of flour on the cutting board.
Okay.
Okay. And she's kneading it right now, just enough for the dough to absorb the extra flour we added onto the cutting board. Then we're going to divide it by cutting it into even pieces.
And make small.
and she is making small balls that she will then put into a pan and allow that to rest. So she just added a little bit of oil to the pan.
Not stick.
So it won't stick. Okay, so after we made the dough, she made them into dough balls, and this is how many we have. We made 14 dough balls, and these are going to rest for about a half an hour. We're going to cover them with plastic wrap, and we're going to move on to making the filling right now. Let's talk a little bit about the filling ingredients that go into Spanakopita. We have fresh spinach, we have green onions, we have feta cheese, we have eggs, and we have bulgur. So the bulgur that we use is a Middle Eastern ingredient. It's used a lot in Turkey and in some recipes in Greece as well. The bulgur is used in this recipe to absorb any extra liquid that is given off from the spinach and the green onions. But we're going to try to remove as much as we can, but this kind of gives us a safety net. And it also gives us a nice addition of a whole grain into the spinach pie as well. So with the fresh spinach and the green onions you're going to trim the tops and the bottoms, and then this is a bunch of spinach, and most of the fresh spinach has a lot of stems. So what you're going to do is you're going to cut half of these stems off, and then you're going to go and cut them, but you're not going to rinse them yet. This is an easy way that my mom has figured out how to clean a large amount of spinach without having to sit and rinse every single leaf. So I'm going to show you how to do this. But what we're going to do first is we are going to cut and chop the spinach and the onions before we rinse it. The rinsing and the cleaning part is going to be later. So remember when in my first cooking class, having knife safety and knowing how to hold a knife is very important. So you hold a knife like this. Make sure that your other fingers go around and you have a good grip on the knife. Don't hold your knife this way, and don't put your pointer finger up there either. It doesn't give you a very good amount of control. So try to choke up on the knife like this, and this is how you'll hold it to have much better control. And remember, when we put everything together in our spinach, we're going to keep a claw type of for our hand, and we're going to hold it like this so we don't cut off our fingers. And the way that we're going to cut the spinach is we're going to lead with our point down first, and then we're going to have a nice motion like this. So let me move this aside a little bit so you can have a better look. Okay. And you're going to make about 1/2-inch cuts onto your cutting board. And you're going to keep the stems as well. And that's it. You're going to add them to the bowl of the spinach. So this amount is a lot of spinach, but remember, we're making 2 large spinach pies today. The recipe that you're going to get is for one of the pies, one of the pans, and it'll be a recipe for this pan. But today we are making enough filling to fill both of these pans. So this is actually 3 full bunches of spinach, which is equal to about 2 pounds. The next part is cutting the onions, and the onions we are going to cut in 1/4 inch. Again, line them up. And you're going to add them to the bowl of the onions. And these were 3 bunches of green onions. And now we're going to show you how we rinse them. So one thing to keep in mind when you use fresh spinach bunches, the fresh leaves have a lot of dirt that's clinging to them. So we want to make sure that we clean these spinach leaves very, very well. The same thing with your green onions. Many of the green onions that are bigger and thicker, inside of the green onion, sometimes you'll find dirt. So it's really important to wash the green onions very thoroughly as well. So we're going to show you the way that my mom washes and rinses the spinach and the onions. So right now at this stage, they've been cut, but they have not been rinsed. So follow me over to the sink, and you will see exactly how we rinse the spinach and the green onions. Okay, so now let's take a look at how we're going to be rinsing the spinach and the onions. We'll start off with the cut spinach first. We're adding it to our bowl, our sink bowl. So before I added this, I washed my sink bowls very, very well. And I filled them with about 2 inches of water. And you're just going to swirl the spinach in the sink bowl to kind of release all the dirt that may be stuck onto the leaves. You'll notice that some spinach is dirtier than others. So it's a really important step to try to rinse these spinach leaves as much as you can so you can reduce the amount of dirt. So then you just move it over to the other bowl. And you do the same thing in the other bowl. And then the water that's in the first sink, we're going to empty out and we're going to fill it up with more water. So at the end of the rinsing process, we drained the bowl from water and we moved the spinach, we let it drain a little bit more. We moved the spinach to the other bowl and my mom is now adding a little bit of salt, and the reason for the salt is to draw out any excess moisture that the spinach has, and she's kind of massaging it in between both of her hands, and the salt is going to help to draw out that excess moisture. It's also going to help to decrease the volume of the spinach, because as we know, lettuce, spinaches, all of those types of vegetables contain a lot of water. And when they cook, they will cook down to very little. So we want to try to help out that process by giving it a head start and by adding a little bit of salt. She added about a half teaspoon to a teaspoon of salt. And you see in the bowl, the spinach has decreased in volume just by rubbing it. And then every handful that she puts into the big, large bowl, she's also squeezing it as much as she can to remove as much of the liquid that she can. Now the bulgur that I showed you earlier as one of the ingredients is also going to serve to absorb any extra moisture that you see from the spinach. But the main reason for this is to kind of decrease the volume of the spinach right now and to remove some of that excess moisture. And that's what salt does. It removes excess moisture from our food. So this just takes us a few minutes. And then after she's done with that, we're going to rinse the green onions. And because there's not a lot of green onions, we're just going to rinse the green onions in a large bowl with cool water, swirl them around, and remove them from the water. The dirt, any dirt that is in the green onions will fall to the bottom of the bowl. Okay, so we've already rinsed our spinach and our onions and we put them in a very large bowl. This is a really big bowl. You need a lot of space in order to mix the rest of the ingredients. Of course, remember that we're making enough filling to make 2 large Spanakopitas, but the recipe that I will be giving you will be enough to make this big size of a pan, which is a 15 by 10 inch pan. Okay, so we're gonna add some eggs. And we're adding 6 eggs to this particular amount of filling. And we're also going to add 1.5 pounds of feta cheese. So in this recipe, my mom doesn't use imported Greek feta. It tends to be a little bit more expensive here. She's very happy with the way that American feta works in a Spanakopita recipe. So this is actually called domestic feta, which means that it's made here in the United States. So she's going to add the feta cheese, and everything gets mixed up with your hands. And then we'll add the bulgur to this as well. Remember to absorb any of the extra moisture that may be present. And then we're going to add some oil, and we're adding extra virgin olive oil from Greece, and we're adding about a half cup of oil to this mixture. And with your hands, you're going to mix the filling, all the ingredients, until they are well incorporated. And we don't add any salt to this because the feta cheese has enough salt. And remember, we use a little bit of salt to squeeze out the excess moisture from the spinach when we rinse them. So you don't need to add any extra salt here. We also don't traditionally use pepper as well. So this recipe comes from my mom's family, and you may have seen other recipes of spanakopita that have other ingredients like dill or parsley, or I've seen some recipes with garlic. None of these are very traditional in actual authentic Greek spanakopita, although dill can be. My mom's family never put dill in their spanakopita, and we never grew up with that flavor in spanakopita, so she doesn't add it. But you're welcome to use a few tablespoons of dill in this mixture if you like dill. So this is looking really nice.
Okay,
Again, the hands are the best tool for mixing a recipe, your filling. So now this recipe is going to be divided amongst 2 pans, and she's going to show you now how to make the spanakopita with the store-bought phyllo. Let's talk a little bit about phyllo. And the phyllo that we are using today is from a brand called Kondos. There's a lot of different phyllo brands available in the American market, and they all work a little bit differently. So a lot of the phyllo boxes also have a number on there, and that means how thick or how thin the phyllo sheets are. On the box, it'll tell you how many phyllo sheets are approximately in each box, and each box can be completely different. So this one has 18 to 22 phyllo sheets, pastry sheets, and we counted them, and there's actually 19 in this box. So they will be a little bit different depending on the brand that you use. And the way that they behave will also be a little bit different. Some of them, when you open them up, there's more flour attached to each sheet. Some of them are smoother than others. This one happens to be very, very smooth and works very easily. So we opened it up, and it is packaged in a plastic bag, and it also is rolled in like kind of like a very thin wax paper and sealed. So phyllo, you got to work fast because phyllo dries out very quickly, and you can, if you're new at using phyllo, you may want to put a wet paper or a dish towel on top just to keep everything moist. Otherwise, if you're comfortable with phyllo, you can work fast, and you should be able to get this spinach pie put together in no time. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to do, you're going to have some olive oil, and you're just going to pour some in a jar like this, or I'm sorry, in a measuring cup. And you're going to spread some olive oil, brush some olive oil onto the pan, and then you're going to start adding the phyllo sheets onto the pan. So I'll let my mom do this, and I will explain what she's doing. So she's laying the phyllo sheet onto the pan, and because you've put olive oil on the inside of the pan, the phyllo dough automatically sticks to that oil. So you're just kind of straightening it out. And then you add more olive oil to that sheet. So every sheet that you put down has to be spread with olive oil. You can also use butter as well. So both can be used in this recipe. And in fact, butter makes the spinach pie taste really good as well. Traditionally, in my mom's family in Greece, they only had olive oil, so they were using olive oil to make their pies. Okay. And then she's going to add a second sheet. So depending on the size of the pan will dictate how you're going to place the phyllo sheets into your pan. Because this is a slightly bigger pan, she wanted to have some overhang, so then after she's finished, she is going to roll the edges into the pan, and that's going to seal the spinach pie. So she's adding some more olive oil. Remember, every sheet that you put down of the phyllo dough has to have olive oil spread on it. And she's going to add how many on the bottom?
The bottom 10.
So I asked her how many she's going to put on the bottom, and she's going to put 10 phyllo sheets on the bottom, and we'll add the filling, and then we'll put 9 sheets to finish off the pita. And she's laying down the phyllo sheets and brushing each sheet with a little bit of oil. She's being careful to make sure that she places each phyllo sheet alternating horizontal and vertical to the right and to the left to make sure that there's about a 2-inch overhang on the long sides and a little bit of overhang on the short sides. So because of her many years of experience, she knows exactly how the placement of the phyllo sheets need to look like in the pan. But in the end, your goal is basically to be able to seal the spinach pie so you don't have any of the contents of the spinach pie coming out. So this is the reason why you want to have a little bit of an overhang. So we're just going to add the filling with a big spoon. Go ahead. Okay, so after you add the filling, you smooth it out, and it fills about a little less than half the pan, but that's okay because you're going to add another 9 layers of phyllo dough on top, and it will become very, very nice and thick at the end. Okay, so now we're going to start with the remaining. Okay, so after the filling is finished and it's smoothed out, she folds in all the excess phyllo. This is what everybody loves the most, is the crunchy edges. So don't cut away the excess phyllo, just fold it into the pan and on top of the filling, and then spread and brush a little bit of olive oil onto the phyllo sheets. This is what it looks like. So she's going to start adding the top layers right now, and she started off by adding the phyllo onto the pan. And there's no overhang on the top phyllo for this first one. And then are you going to fold this over?
Yes.
Okay, so she's going to fold over this excess so you see how much excess is here. And she's just going to fold that over, because at this point you don't need any excess phyllo because we've already encased the spinach pie with the bottom layers of the phyllo. These pieces of phyllo you're going to add onto the pan, and you're going to brush with olive oil and fold over, so it's going to take the exact measurements of the pan, and there's not going to be any overhang with the top phyllo sheets. This is what the Spanakopita looks after scoring, and at this point you can put it into a preheated oven, 350 degrees, for about an hour until the Spanakopita is puffed and golden brown. Just be careful if you're going to use a glass Pyrex pan like this one. You may want to see what the pita looks like 45 minutes into it. It may be done at 45 minutes because glass transmits heat a little faster and more efficiently than metal pans. Okay, so now we're going to show you how to make homemade phyllo. This is one of our favorite kinds of pita. We always ask my mom to make Spanakopita with her homemade phyllo. So what she's taking, she's left the dough balls to rest for about a half an hour, and then she poured some cornstarch into a glass dish, and she dredged each ball into cornstarch. This allows her to roll out the phyllo a little bit better, so she's rolling it just a little bit. She made 14 balls, dough balls, and we are going to put 7 on the bottom and 7 on the top. In the middle, of course, we're going to add our filling, but she's going to show you the trick on how to create this really beautiful bottom and top layer without having to sit and roll out every single piece of, roll out each dough ball. So you may be interested to a little bit of history about this wooden piece, this wooden plank. So this is a very traditional piece of equipment that women in northern Greece would use to roll out their phyllo dough, and it just makes the rolling out process much, much easier. She had this made by one of her friends who was also from northern Greece but a different part of Greece, and her friend had this made, a carpenter made this for them, and you notice that it has a hole here and it has a piece of string, and this allows her to hang it onto the wall.
To stay, because if not to hang in the wall, make it bend.
So she said it's important to hang these pieces of wood onto the wall because otherwise it could warp.
Yeah.
She's taking each dough circle and she's going to brush each dough circle with olive oil. And she's going to start stacking each of these dough circles on top of each other, making sure that every layer is brushed with olive oil. And then she's going to roll it out. So for those of you that have ever made puff pastry or know how puff pastry is made, it's a very similar process, but in puff pastry, you are mixing in or folding in butter, and you're folding it in, rolling it out, folding it in, rolling it out. This is a very similar process, but with olive oil. So she's stacking them, and then in the end, once they're stacked, all 7 of them, she's gonna roll it out and put it onto the bottom of the pan. And when this bakes, each layer is going to separate in the baking process, and it's gonna seem like puff pastry. This is a much, much easier process than how she used to do it when she was younger. Years ago, women used to sit and roll out each individual dough circle to the diameter that they needed for the pan they were going to use, and it took a lot longer. This is a much faster process, and this is something she learned more recently. When did you learn this process?
15, 20 years.
So very recent, 15, 20 years ago. She learned this from friends, family in Greece?
Yeah, friends in Greece.
Friends in Greece. So she's carefully measuring out the edges to make sure that they're as even as she can get them by pulling them a little bit and making sure that they look pretty uniform. And then spreading each layer of phyllo dough with olive oil. Okay, so she's finished adding the 7 layers of dough on top of each other with a layer of olive oil. The very top layer, though, she does not add any olive oil. So she's starting off rolling it out with the regular rolling pin. So she's going to continue to roll this out with a little bit of cornstarch and the traditional rolling pin, and then she's going to move over to this. This is a dowel, basically. And this is about a 3/4 inch dowel, and it's about 3 feet long, and she is going to use that to open up the phyllo to the diameter of the pan. And that's what you would do if you would try this at home. You would pick the pan that you would use, and you would create the size of the phyllo is going to be a little bigger than the diameter of the pan you're going to use, because you want some overhang to be able to fold over like we did in the pita made with the store-bought phyllo. So as you see, there is definitely technique and a lot of experience that is part of this whole process. So she is carefully adding the phyllo to the end of the dowel, stretching it slightly, rolling it, and then pushing it and rolling it again.
And now push.
And then she pushes it out as she releases it. So she's slowly rolling this out. She's not putting a lot of pressure in the rolling part. She's putting pressure when she first brings the dough away from her, stretching it as she puts it onto the dowel, and then as she releases it and brings the dowel back to herself, she's adding a little bit of pressure.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. And she's also, as it unrolls, she's also paying attention to the shape of the dough, and she wants to make sure that it's as round as possible. But the last roll, she was happy with the size of the shape of the dough, and with the dowel, she lifts the whole dough and she brings the pan and just unrolls the dough on top of the pan. It makes it much, much easier than unrolling the dough onto the wood and trying to lift the dough with your hands and trying to put it into the pan. So always use your dowel as your best friend, your rolling pin. So that will help you to unroll the dough onto the pan. So now she's just draping the phyllo a little bit nicer and making sure that the phyllo goes into all the corners or the edges of the pan. And you see that there's a little bit of overhang. There's a few inches of overhang, which is fine because we're going to fold that over. And then she is going to add some olive oil on top of that.
Not too much.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
And then on top of this, we're going to add our filling. And then we'll go ahead and do the same process with the top of the dough. We're going to use the same process. We're going to dredge each dough ball into cornstarch and create the small circles and then stack them on top of each other with olive oil. Roll them out with the smaller rolling pin and then finish up the rolling with the larger dowel.
Okay.
So now the filling is in the pan. She's just smoothing it out, making sure that it gets to all parts of the pan. And then we'll set the pan aside and she will start making the rest of the dough for the top. So you notice that it looks like it's just one piece of dough, but it really isn't. Remember, we had 7 dough circles that we stacked on top of each other. So this is like puff pastry in the end. This is all going to puff and separate into individual pieces or layers of phyllo dough in the oven. So it's gonna look really beautiful. Okay, so the top layer of the phyllo is ready. We have the 7 dough circles that were stacked on top of each other and then rolled out to the diameter that she wanted. And what she did is she folded it in quarters and it just and folded it again. It'll just make it easier for her to add it or to transfer it to the top of the pita. So she's adding it to the top part of the pita around 12 o'clock and then she is unwrapping it. We made it slightly bigger, but that's okay. So it just makes it easier to transfer onto the pita. And she's just kind of fitting it into the pan. Like we did in the store-bought phyllo, the spanakopita we made with the store-bought phyllo, we're folding in the edges. So there's going to be a really beautiful crust at the end. That's our favorite part.
Πες ότι εγώ είμαι μαθημένη με μεγάλο ταψί, not this small one.
That's true. So this small pan is throwing her off a little bit with this recipe because she never ever makes spanakopita in such a small pan.
But this is for sure.
Yes, but she made it for this class because she knows that nobody will ever make spanakopita in a big, large pan. But we're going to show you what pan she usually makes her spanakopita in. So nevertheless, it's confusing her a little bit because she's used to making larger pieces of dough and making a much bigger portion or size of spanakopita than what we're looking at right now. So she's now going to spread or brush a little bit of olive oil onto the top of the pita, making sure
first make it round.
So first she's brushing the edges of the dough circle that she rolled out. Γιατί το αρχίζεις στην άκρη πρώτα?
Στην άκρη γιατί αυτά θα τα γυρίσω και πρέπει να έχει λάδι για να μην κολλήσει το dough.
Okay. So she said she starts with the edges of the top of the dough because after she's done with this part, she's going to roll the outside overhang into the dough and she doesn't want it to stick. So she's starting off with that. So you're going to see now how she just rolls it. Kind of like if you've ever made a fruit pie, you make the edges. So this is the edges. So she's just rolling it into the top layer of the spanakopita. Just gently, not a lot of pressure.
Both phyllo at the bottom and the top is make very big. It's not supposed to for this size pan.
Το φτιάξαμε μεγάλο.
Yeah.
Okay. So she said that the diameter of phyllo dough that we made for this particular pan, we made it a little bit larger than we should have. But again, she's used to rolling out dough circles almost the size of this big plank. So to make it smaller was throwing her off a little bit. But she's making it work and it looks absolutely beautiful. And now she's going to finish the top of the spanakopita with more olive oil. I know you're laughing. But again, remember that this spanakopita in the days that my mom was growing up in Greece in the 50s, this spanakopita was the main meal for the family. There was nothing else that they would be eating. So it was okay that there was a little bit extra olive oil in it. They were also, remember, they were farmers, so everything was done by hand. There wasn't machinery. They were burning a lot of calories. So what are we talking about nutritionally in spanakopita? So this is a vegetarian recipe. There's no meat or anything like that in there. So we have the spinach, we have the eggs, we have the cheese. The eggs and the cheese are giving us a really good source of protein. The cheese is giving us some great source of calcium. And the spinach itself is giving us a lot of vitamin C, folic acid, a lot of other vitamins. And then from the phyllo dough is a good source of carbohydrates. And then the olive oil, of course, is a good monounsaturated fat that you're getting. So overall, if you're careful with the portion size, you consider this as a main meal. It's not a bad all-around meal to have as a main course. If you're going to have it in addition to something else, in addition to meat, then I would cut the slices a little bit smaller so it can be...
I recommend to cut like this.
So in a round pan, she recommends that
because
you cut
it's too small.
Right, you cut it into a pie shape.
Like this.
Because this is a smaller diameter pan. But we'll show you how she cut it into what size slices she...
Yeah.
Right. The size slices she made in her bigger pan,
And
she was able to get square slices, but with a smaller diameter pan, she recommends that you cut pie shapes out of this. So do you score this first?
Yeah, I have to cut. Yeah.
Okay. So she's going to score this as well, just like she did with the store-bought phyllo. And again, using that same sharp pointy knife, she is cutting just the top layer of the phyllo and slightly going into the filling, which is fine. So she's first cutting it in, scoring it into 4 slices, and then she will cut it, it'll end up being about 8 slices?
Yeah.
Yeah. So 8 really nice slices. Again, think about how you're going to serve this, and if you're going to serve this as a side dish, then you may want to consider cutting these into 16 slices instead of 8. So after she's done scoring this will also go into the oven for how long?
1 hour.
Again, 1 hour.
Yeah. Yeah.
So 350?
To make it gold. Yeah, 350.
So 350 degrees for an hour. Again, you're going to look at a golden brown color. This phyllo is also going to puff up. It's going to look very beautiful. So what does our finished product look like? Look how beautiful this is. This large pan is the pan I was talking about. This is the pan that she usually makes spanakopita with when she makes her homemade phyllo. So this is the pita with homemade phyllo. This one is the spanakopita with the store-bought phyllo. You also see the difference in texture. It's completely different, and the flavor is different as well. Of course, we prefer the one with the homemade phyllo, so it's always a treat when she tells us that she made spanakopita with homemade phyllo. So let's cut into this and take a look at what the slices look like. And of course, we also love the edges because the edges are crunchy. So as you see, she wanted me to show everybody how the phyllo gets separated into individual layers as it bakes. So even though it looked like it was just one piece of phyllo that we added to the bottom of the pan and to the top of the pan, when it baked, each phyllo that we put separated with the olive oil that was in there, and it separated in the baking process, similar to what puff pastry does when you bake puff pastry in the oven. Now let's cut into the pita, the spanakopita with the store-bought phyllo. So I'm gonna take this one, because I love the edges, and this is for you. So we're gonna try this.
Yeah.
Which one are you gonna try? I'm gonna try the homemade.
The homemade?
Oh my God, this is so good. Wow. Thanks, Mom.
Welcome.
This was pretty awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
My pleasure, yes. That's my mom's favorite saying when we tell her thank you. My pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure introducing all of you to my mom. I wish you all a very happy Mother's Day tomorrow. I know this seemed like a really hard recipe, but it's not hard once you learn how to make it. I would suggest that you start off with the store-bought phyllo. And the nice thing about spanakopita made with store-bought phyllo is that you can freeze it, and it freezes beautifully and you can take it out and bake it from its frozen state. So you can leave it in the freezer for about 3 to 6 months and it'll be fine. Usually in our freezers it doesn't last too long. We may freeze it for about a month and then we're eating it. So thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed our cooking class, cooking with my mom, Spanakopita.